Okay, good morning, everybody. I think we are now live and we are here to celebrate International Women's Day at DMU. We have a conversation lined up between our new Vice-Chancellor, Professor Katie Normington, and Alice Chilver, who is Chief Executive Officer at WEN, that's the Women's Higher Education Network. Got a couple of technical issues, so Katie is on her way into the studio once they're sorted, but until Katie arrives, Alice and I thought we would have a little bit of an introductory chat until Katie joins in. So hopefully you've all got your coffees, you're all delighted, those of you who've got children, because they may be back at school, and we can make sure that they're feeling happy and with their friends, and we can concentrate on our work and on celebrating International Women's Day in 2021. So the hashtag today is Choose to Challenge. And there are other hashtags IWD 2021. So feel free to get hashtagging, post things throughout the day. We've got such a great lineup. We've got sessions all the way through, and you all have seen the menu of things that we've got on for today all the way through the day. So feel free to dip in and out. But what I'll do now is in this next hour, so this is going to take us through till 10 o'clock, I'm going to start with a conversation with Alice, and then we will see. I think Katie is going to join us. Actually, I've just seen Katie has just joined us. So what I'll do is I'm going to introduce both of them, and then you will hear a conversation between the two of them. And then we should have between 15 to 20 minutes for Q&A. So I'm going to keep an eye on the comments in the chat, and we should have time for a great Q&A session afterwards. So without further ado, a quick intro. So Professor Katie Normington joined DMU as Vice-Chancellor in January 2021 to become the first female Vice-Chancellor for the university. Prior to this, she was Deputy Principal Academic at Royal Holloway, University of London. Katie has been a passionate advocate for the advancement of women's careers and instigated a women's development programme at her previous institution, for which she won the Times Higher Ed Leadership and Development Award. Katie is a professor of drama, and her research focuses on theatre history, in particular medieval English drama and contemporary theatre practice. She's published 6 books in these areas and continues to write articles within the field. That's Katie, and I'm now going to introduce Alice. So Alice will join us shortly, and then Katie and Alice will have a chat. So Alice is founder and CEO of WEN, the Women's Higher Education Network. As CEO, Alice leads a national network uniting all women in higher education to accelerate change. She's head of people and organisational development at Oxford University and former director of organisational development at UCL. Before working in higher education, Alice spent 8 years in the private sector, most recently as director of development at Global Leadership Consultancy, specialising in aligning people, culture and strategy. She specialises in bringing people together to build alignment, momentum, and deliver change. In 2014, Alice was awarded for her work on staff networks. And 2017, she was awarded the Gareth Williams Prize for her work on communities of practice. So Katie, Alice, welcome. And I'm going to hand it over to you. Alice, I think you're going to kick things off. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Jo. And nice to see you, Katie. I'm glad you found your way in. I was going to start our conversation this morning talking about a little bit about what it's been like to start a new role during lockdown. Because you and I have that in common. We've both started new roles in new organisations during lockdown. And I suppose what's happened this morning is one of the downsides of that, facing technical difficulties. But also the positive of that is learning how to deal with them like we've never had to before, right? We're on our own, just problem solving by ourselves a lot of the time. But taking a step back then, what's the experience been like for you of starting at De Montfort during lockdown and therefore working remotely so much?
Thanks very much, Alice. Of course, it's, like you will have found as well, it's not really the experiences that one was hoping for. And I think certainly a lot of running a university is obviously working with people. And, as I was leading up to planning about it and thinking about starting, you imagine, of course, your first meetings with your senior team. And when you imagine them, you imagine yourself in a room with people. And so it takes quite a big shift to then think, well, actually, it won't be like that, of course, will it? There have been some positives. So I do come to Leicester and onto campus sort of 3 days a week. I was very keen that I did do that. I think, within the sort of current practices we're allowed, it's probably as safe as I can be, and obviously make sure it is. But of course, when I get here, it's pretty empty. Even so, it's given me a chance to say hello to a few people. But I think also it was working around that and thinking technically about what you can do. And I thought, well, actually, if the only kind of way I can communicate with people is through, this medium, and it is through things like Teams, I actually decided to set up 48 listening sessions with staff and student bodies in there as well. So I probably wouldn't have done that. In the first 2 months, I've met over 1,000 staff. I kind of query whether I'd have quite done that if I'd been on campus, because I couldn't have physically got from sort of one place to the other quite as quickly as I could. So in that sense, I think it's kind of helped to think about how it is that you can reach groups of people and do that in ways which kind of suits all people as well to get there. So, obviously some downsides in terms of you don't really get a feel for the place or what it's really like. But I think also upsides in working out where it is that technology enables you to come together more easily. You can reach larger groups of people. And what's about for you, Alice? I mean, what did you find?
Yeah, so I was on maternity leave before I started my role at Oxford. And before that, I worked at UCL. So whilst I was on maternity leave, I interviewed for a new role, and then I came back into new role, new organisation. And so it's been pretty strange not meeting anyone and not having those, those handshakes and just sort of being in the same room as people. It makes such a difference. So I suppose from a certain perspective, it's been good to sort of really reinforce the value of those social relationships and having physical contact with people, sort of not being able to do that, I suppose, emphasizing just how important it is. From a personal perspective, it's been, I suppose it was a bit more of a gentler approach back to work from maternity leave, because I didn't have to add on the commute. I was just, in the same house, and so not losing out on time being with my son on the commute. So that felt like a helpful ease in. But overall, I think at work, it's just been a shame and difficult and a bit slower to sort of to really get to know people. And until you really know people, it's difficult to do the kind of work that I do, which is about cultural change and organizational development. But I think from a WEN's perspective, the being forced to work remotely has been really positive, because it's meant that we have been able to very quickly connect women from all over the country. Previously, we had struggled to get out of London. We had been quite a London-centric network, and now we're not. We are really interacting with women all over the country and beyond. So that's been really positive. So a mixed experience, I think, is how I'll conclude that intro from us, Katie. So I wanted to, I thought it'd be really good to start this conversation from reflecting back at the beginning of your career, Katie. I know that you were the first woman in your family to go to university, and now you're a vice chancellor. Looking back on that, how does that feel to say that?
It does feel quite incredible. I grew up in a small town in the northeast of England, and I remember hearing, I don't know, it might have been someone like Alan Bennett talking about it, but that kind of sense that you grew up thinking no one's ever kind of gone on to achieve something that's well known from my street. So I think there was also to do with that. It was also probably to do with where I grew up. Actually, I've realised my mum gets a bit cross when I start talking about being the first in the family to go to university, because as she points out, she left school at 16 and it was the time when that was quite normal. So she's sort of saying, it wasn't abnormal what I did. I know, Mum, I'm not saying that. And actually, I should also say she went on to get an open university degree in her sort of middle years, and going to her graduation was one of my proudest moments. But yeah, it wasn't expected that I would necessarily go to university. I don't even, well, when I was at university, I never really thought that I'd particularly stay in universities either. So it wasn't as if there was a sort of career trajectory that came off that. But I think, I think it's a good lesson, isn't it, in that people can achieve things. So I find it quite humbling, on the other hand, that it has been possible.
It's incredible. It's incredible. Can you tell us a bit about the beginning of your career then? Because I understand that you were already working you were already working in a full-time role when you started to study for a PhD, and you studied your PhD part-time whilst continuing to work full-time. Why did you decide to embark on a PhD?
Yeah, thanks. So, basically, when I left university, I really wanted to be a theatre director and did a master's in that, and then increasingly taught drama workshops. So I was doing that from really kind of when I was about 18, 19, actually. What happened was that started to take over more and more, and found myself then teaching in a school as an instructor. And then from that, I got a job in a further education college teaching BTEC and A-levels. And it was, the first few years were great because, 16 to 18-year-olds, I think, are just a really lovely age to work with. They're trying to define themselves, find out what they want to do. And then actually what started to happen is that there were changes made by the government in terms of what you could do. So it became pretty much clear that overnight, if you couldn't sign on at 16 anymore, which you could do when I first started that. And, unfortunately, we got people who started coming because there was absolutely nothing else for them to do. And I suddenly find myself teaching in an environment where I thought, actually, I'm doing more policing than I am teaching now. More of the, can you be quiet and get on with this? And we don't need to hear what you're doing on Saturdays right now. Can you get on and focus? And I sort of thought, I'm not, I love teaching. I'm not sure that this is quite the environment I want to be in. It's not bringing out the best in me, and I'm not sure it's letting me bring out the best in others, therefore, and thought, well, actually, if I'm teaching, I want to be teaching in a university setting. And thought, actually, anyway, that's going to happen is if I get a PhD. So yeah, I did that while working full time. And you have those. Everyone has those moments in their lives, don't they? When you look back and think, gosh, how could I ever manage that? But yeah, somehow it happened. But yes, so interestingly, my step to going into higher education was actually through teaching and through wanting to teach in a particular environment and in a particular way, which I thought higher education would support. Yeah.
So you got your PhD, and then what happened after that? How did you begin your career in higher education?
Yeah, thanks. So I was probably 2/3 of the way through the PhD when I got my first job, then at Greenwich University. I'm talking about a long time ago. So this is when, you could get jobs quite easily without PhDs. And then was there, again, that was in a humanities school rather than a drama department. And I thought, actually, I really want to be working in a drama department. I was teaching quite a broad range of things while I was at Greenwich. And so just as I submitted my PhD, I got the job at Royal Holloway. I stayed there for 23 years, something like that. And so actually progressed there from being, a lecturer. I had 2 children as I pretty much arrived as well. And then progressed from being a sort of lecturer to a senior lecturer. And then one of the heads of department was away on sabbatical for a year, and they sort of said, we need someone to cover this. And I think I'd been sitting in some meetings on campus, and the dean said, well, what about someone like Katie? I've noticed her. She's very good in meetings. And, I was encouraged to apply for this sort of 1-year interim. That went really well. And I think, people were so complimentary and said, gosh, you've really changed the culture, the tone, how we're approaching things just in a year as head of department. And then when that job came up permanently, I applied for it again and started doing that. But actually pretty quickly, the dean's job then came up. And I, against lots of external competition, I applied for that and got that. And then began really a 12-year period being a senior executive at Royal Holloway, through which point my titles and roles kind of evolved. And it was usually, me being asked to do a slightly wider portfolio, which eventually kind of evolved into a new role as well. So, it was a sort of process of evolution, I think. And certainly going into senior management, I sort of thought, when I took the dean's job, I thought, well, look, I should give it a go for a couple of years. If I really miss the teaching, and the amount of research will be much less. So if I really miss that, I can still go back after a couple of years, I'm sure. But beyond that point, I'll have to think about how easy it is to do, because I'll be so out of touch with some of those skills. So anyway, I got there and thought, no, I do like this.
It's great to sort of think, yes, I'll give it a go, and I can always change my mind if I don't like it. And I wonder how often people do that and just keep on with that trajectory, and so use that as an opportunity to kind of convince yourself to give something a go. I want to talk a little bit more about that, Katie, because I think it's really interesting for women to hear from other women about, how they progressed through their career and what choices they made at certain points, and who influenced them and supported them and pulled them up the ladder. And I wondered, do you consider that you kind of, what do you think happened to you to kind of keep you moving up? Do you consider that you just said yes to lots of opportunities, or did you push open doors for yourself, or did you have other people around you that supported you and suggested things to you, or was it a combination of all of those things?
Yeah, thanks, Alice. And I think you're right. I think it is a combination. I think one thing that's really important in maybe in any career is, you actually have to kind of get on and deliver some things. And so, I think quite quickly I was able to, as a faculty dean, begin to get people to work differently and begin to sort of achieve things that we hadn't. But also, so I think there was a sort of evidence there that things were shifting and moving. So that sort of delivery. But then I think more of it was also about making opportunities. So quite often I would spot something that I thought, well, actually, we're not doing, so we weren't doing things like a first year message really at that moment, first year kind of NSS type of survey, or second year one. And I sort of thought, actually, it'd be really helpful, given we're doing NSS, that we ask first and second years about this. And so we brought that in the faculty, and then of course the university saw that and thought, well, that's a good idea. So that was quite interesting. So it's those things about, and that happened again with the whole staff development program that I started running for ECRs, and started running it in the faculty because we didn't have it. And then the next thing, the university said, actually, that's a great program, we'll run it from the university point of view. So I guess some of that was like pushing those things, the door open, as it were. I think getting there, I talked a bit earlier about the dean who sort of had spotted me in meetings, and she was really important and is still a very close friend now in her sort of mid-70s, but I will still phone her and say, oh, I'm thinking about this. What are your ideas on this? So I think having a mentor and someone who you really respect, who you can draw on for advice, has been really helpful. What have you found, Alice, though? Are those similar things?
Yeah, I think I probably would have used to say to people that my advice to others would be about saying yes to any opportunity that comes your way. And then I think more recently I've reflected on that and think that it's probably a bit more than that. There's probably something about creating those opportunities for yourself a bit as well. And I think, a key moment in my career was when I had been working at UCL for about 3 or 4 years in a faculty role. So I was working as a business development manager and then a manager of strategic initiatives in the faculty. And a big change program got announced. It was announced that UCL would embark on this big program called Transforming Our Professional Services. And we didn't know much about it. There wasn't much that UCL said about it. But the little that they did say sounded really exciting to me. And before I worked in higher education, I used to work for a leadership consultancy firm. And the language that UCL were using to talk about this program reminded me of that work. I realized I quite missed it and would be really excited to get back involved in it. So I contacted the program manager and arranged to just go and have a meeting with him. And we just had a chat, and the chat resulted in me designing a secondment for myself on the program. And I sort of realized that if I had waited for opportunities to come up, one might not have come up, or one might not have come up that was suitable for me. But because I just went and organized a chat with this person, I was able to sort of co-design something that I could do to really create a lot of value. And my career from that point, I mean, that is how I've ended up in a HR role in my main career. So I think that was just an example of how, yes, I said yes, and I sort of said yes to opportunities, but I've also sort of engineered them for myself a little bit. So yeah, an interesting recent reflection, thinking about my own career as well.
Sorry, you were going to go on.
Oh no, that was it. I stopped.
Yeah, thanks a lot. And but that's interesting because you went into higher education then from more of a consultancy sort of role. I mean, what drew you into higher education?
Yeah, so I had been working in the private sector for about 7 or 8 years, and I'd been working for a consultancy specialising in aligning people and culture with strategy. But essentially, we were teaching leaders how to lead themselves as a prerequisite to being able to lead their organisations and lead their teams and support their businesses to be a force for good in society. So it was absolutely fantastic work. I really, really enjoyed it. It felt like we were doing something really meaningful. But the work we were doing, it was absolutely certainly changing the outlook and the trajectory of these leaders' lives. But these leaders were so senior that they were not too far off retirement. And it made me think, what if we could have the same sort of impact on people much younger in their lives, much earlier on in their lives? And if it would change their trajectory, they could achieve more than they thought were possible. And I became really interested in the concept of social mobility and wondered what tools we could use from the leadership development work to apply to young leaders. And one of our clients at the time was the Girl Scouts of America. So we were working with at their global headquarters in New York on their strategy and helping them to do some cultural work with their senior leaders. And because of that, we agreed that we would do some pilots of our leadership programs with some Girl Scouts in Arizona. And it was absolutely brilliant work. It was really rewarding. It really worked, you see. We were able to influence the trajectory of these young girls' lives, making them think differently about their own capabilities and their own aspirations, and coming up with a plan to actually pursue that. So that work is what really inspired me to want to change sectors and get closer to the idea of being able to influence that. So that's why I joined higher education. I haven't ended up working that closely with students yet, but most recently in my role now at Oxford, I can see glimmers of it. I'm involved in the new Race Equality Task Force and also the creation of the Wellbeing Strategy, and I can see that I will have the opportunity to influence things that will impact students and prospective students through that work. So I'm really pleased about that and can sort of see the full circle of my original motivation coming through.
That's great. And just in terms of WEN as well, how did you end up as the chief executive of that? Was that an opportunity created by you, or was it one that you were asked
Yes,
to?
that was one of those examples as well. So I, about not long after I joined UCL, I was having lunch with a colleague, a female colleague, and I was asking her about her career ambitions because it seemed to me that she had moved quite quickly and got quite far with her career, but that she had been in the same role for about 3 or 4 years when I met her and I was talking to her. So I was just probing her a little bit and asking her, what's next for you? When are you going to move on up? And she told me that her and her husband were trying to get pregnant. They wanted to start a family. And so leaving UCL wasn't an option for her. She needed the stability at that time. And when she looked across UCL, despite it being a huge organisation, she couldn't see any of the roles that that were suitable for her. She couldn't see anyone in those roles likely to move on anytime soon. And so she just had resigned herself to the fact that she should just, wait it out and, keep focused on her own role, as it were, but wait till she'd had a family so that she could afford to take more risks, I suppose, and leave the organisation. So it was that conversation that triggered all of my work in women's networks. We decided that we would that she would benefit from figuring out if there were other women at UCL that had been in a similar circumstance, and how they had and what they had done about it. So we set out to try and find her some women across UCL that she could speak to. We assumed there would be a network for women at UCL, and there wasn't at the time. So we set one up. And in setting up that network at UCL, we tapped into this huge energy, this huge positive force. Women wanted to come together. They wanted to share their experiences in a way that could support one another. So that was a really positive experience for us and all of the women involved. And we realized that we hadn't tapped into something that was unique and something unusual going on at UCL. This was probably going to be the same sort of situation across the sector. So we thought that it would be a great idea if we could set up a national network so that we could connect women beyond the boundaries of our institutions and beyond the boundaries of our disciplines and subject areas. So we could basically harness all of that energy that we had experienced at UCL and take it further. So yeah, that was definitely one of those examples where we created that opportunity for ourselves, both in terms of setting up the network at UCL and then thinking of the opportunity to go further with WEN.
Thanks. It's interesting, isn't it? Because I was just thinking about hearing us both talk now. And in a sense, I suppose what we're doing is sort of talking about the things that have gone well and how, we set this up and this led to this and et cetera, et cetera. But I mean, I don't know if you're similar to me, but I mean, I think I'm also keen to point out that it's just been an awful lot of hard work, and also not everything has gone right. Because I know that I think I used to look at other people who in really senior roles and think, well, it's all right for them. It's all gone right and they've got there. And now I realise when you look at all those people, it's far from the case. For them too, things will have not gone the way they wanted, or, there were the jobs or the moments you didn't get, or where someone else was asked to do something that you wanted to. So I don't know if it's the same for you, but I mean, I think I'm just clear in saying, it kind of is never all a bed of roses, which I think is a difficult thing, because when you start talking about how you got to where you got to, you obviously emphasize the kind of big steps that you take. But there's also the moments where nothing's going anywhere, really, to be honest, as well. I don't know if you found that as well, Alice.
Yeah, totally. I think this is such an important point as well, because yes, when you look back and you think about that narrative of how you got to where you got, you focus on those positive moments and those really good experiences. It's really important to recognize that, yeah, we have to experience failure to get where we get to. And I suppose if you don't experience those setbacks and you don't fail sometimes, then you can't learn from that and move on. Should we talk a little bit more about that, Katie? Is there one example that you want to share with people about, a moment that you had thought would go in a particular way, but actually didn't go how you'd hoped, and then what you learned from that?
I mean, there've been a few things. I suppose one was a very interesting time was when I was at Royal Holloway and my new boss arrived, and there were three of us who were deans at that level, and we worked really closely as deans. It was great. And then actually, I think someone left, one of the PVCs left. So there were some bits of portfolio that needed sharing out. And the other two deans got bits of that share, and I didn't get anything at all. And I sort of thought, oh, crikey, okay. Right, well, this hasn't gone very well. And, I thought, well, what is it that I've done? Because, I haven't... As far as I can see, things are going okay, and I'm performing as well as the other two deans, and et cetera, et cetera. And and then of course, people started saying to me as well, we're all remarking it's a bit odd that they've been given these other roles and you haven't got anything. So you kind of think, all right, it's not just me then. And I think I had an appraisal a bit after that with my boss and sort of said, I just want to actually ask you about this, but am I actually doing things okay, and am I doing the things that you want? It's just that I noticed that I wasn't actually given any other tasks, and the other two were. And he sort of went pale and said, no, but you're doing absolutely brilliantly. You're doing everything I could possibly want. And so I kind of realized what had happened is that the other two were much older and more experienced than I was. And he'd kind of made that error of going, I'll give these to the most experienced people, rather than I'll think about this and give it to the people who may well, have the skills to do this. I guess it was a learning point for him after that. And after that, he did give me quite a lot. But, it is one of those things where, you sort of think, actually, that really didn't go how I want. And if it's a signal of what's coming, then it's not going to be great. What about for you, the moments as well for you that
well, yeah, I thought actually of a really recent example. So, it may look on the surface of it that I smoothly glided from UCL to Oxford during maternity leave. And the role that I have at the moment at Oxford is very similar to the one that I had previously at UCL. But I applied for another job at Oxford just before the one I applied for that I currently have, and I didn't get that one. I wasn't even shortlisted for that one, and I thought that I would be. I met all of the essential and desirable criteria, but I wasn't even shortlisted for the role. And it wasn't as senior actually as the one that I've currently got. It was really bizarre, and because I wasn't shortlisted, I wasn't able to get any feedback either. So I wasn't even able to understand why I wasn't shortlisted. So I just thought it was worth sharing that very recent example that, it looks like from the surface that I've just, glided, but actually, applied for other roles. And have not had successes as well, even in one where I was sure I was going to get an interview because I met all of the criteria, but that wasn't the case. Okay, so Katie, I think it would be helpful for us to talk about Choose to Challenge and the impact of the pandemic on women in higher education a bit. I mean, I could talk to you probably all day about your own career, and I would love to when we can face to face, perhaps. But I think it would be great for us to talk a little bit about the challenges that faced by women in the higher education sector. So let's do that. I think it would be really interesting to hear from you about your observations. So what have you seen happening as a result of COVID, or what did you anticipate the gendered impact of COVID to be? And is there anything you think we should? Well, let's stop there. Let's stop there. What have your observations or anticipations?
I mean, I can offer some, but I think it would also be helpful to hear about sort of Wen's work on this, because I think you've probably done less studies than I guess I would know of or have been involved with directly. I mean, it's interesting because I think first of all, the pandemic's gone through various shapes and arcs, hasn't it? But really, the most difficult point from everyone I talked to has been since January. And I think it's had a variety of impacts on people, and we should be really clear that those impacts aren't all the same. But however, we do know, don't we, from all the research that's been published more widely, what's come about in working at home and in having to home educate is that, that those responsibilities have not fallen equally. And actually, we're left therefore with women having yet again kind of, I guess, what's called a double burden, isn't it, of trying to kind of keep the domestic going, keeping the schooling children going, and trying to keep careers going. So, I think that, and we know from some of the data that the number of articles submitted by men during lockdown has increased, and whereas by women it hasn't particularly, or not by the same amount, etc. So there's a real thing about how do we deal with things like research deficits in there. I think also, and then it'd be interesting just to hear a bit more from you about some of the things that Wen has been looking at as well. But I think also, as I said, it doesn't hit everybody similarly. So I think some people have said that they really appreciate the flexibility of working at home and obviously want to try to balance that. And as employers, I know we want to try and support that as well. But also talking to other women, they've been desperate to get back to campus as quickly as they possibly can. And they've sort of made the point that actually while they're at home, they feel like they're just caught in the domestic. They are a kind of wife or a mother, and it's not really their independent space. And what they relied on in terms of having a job and going outside is that it was their own independent space. It wasn't anyone else's. It was them as their own role, not as somebody else's kind of role model that they had modeled in some way. So, I think for me, it's different. It is different for people. So on the one hand, I think the flexibility we would want to try to keep, but on the other, I think I'd be keen not to think about how we also lose that ability for people to step outside of that too. But Alice, I think Wen's been doing a lot of work around the impact.
Yeah, well, so Wen did a research report called "Sharing the Caring," and it looked at the experience of professional services staff specifically, and this was back in autumn last year. And so we captured responses from 1,000 professional services members of staff from across the sector. And what we found was that mothers in dual career households continued to be predominantly responsible for childcare, household chores and duties, for caring outside of the home. And that the pandemic just exacerbated, a situation that was already there. We found that fathers increased their childcare and caring outside the home efforts, but domestic tasks tended to be predominantly in the remit of women. And that during the pandemic, it was these tasks that both increased and weren't possible to be outsourced. And that all demonstrated that unpaid labour in homes of professional services parents in the UK higher education sector is still disproportionately a woman's domain. And that's been recognised in all sorts of global research on the subject. So yeah, it's so interesting and probably what we could have guessed, but really helpful to have research just to back that up. But what we found was that there had been a tremendous effect on well-being and a sense of confidence and staff's ability to work. And there was an even split between those who saw lockdown as having a positive impact on their family life and those who shared concerns. And what we found was that both mothers and fathers shared similar concerns, and they were about stress and feelings of inadequacy and guilt, and having a negative impact on mental health. That parents felt a lack of social connectedness. Parents felt a loss of time to be one's own, to rest, to exercise, to focus on career stretching tasks. So just what you were talking about exactly there, Katie. And parents were also really concerned about their children's isolation and educational progress. So mums and dads, parents were overwhelmingly concerned about the impact of the pandemic on their career in the next sort of 6 to 12 months. And they were concerned about job performance, career progress and reputation, loss of development opportunities, and perceived lack of involvement in decision-making at work. So like I said, we did this survey last summer, and so it'd be really, really interesting to see actually what the impact of this most recent lockdown has had. But today, of course, is the day that children are going back to school. So it feels like a really significant milestone, and I hope a really positive moment for many parents out there as we can start to look forward. But coming back to our research, the recommendations that we ended up with was both for institutions themselves as well as for individuals. And I think that although the timing of our research was specific to the pandemic and it perhaps feels a little bit out of date now, I think actually the recommendations still ring true. And really they're about having the basics in place. So these are things that we as our institutions should be doing, as individuals, as line managers, we should be doing. But I think often when we get busy, these can be things that can be easily overlooked. So I think it's important to emphasize them still. So for higher education institutions, what we said was you need to know your people. You need to understand their circumstances. You need to understand what impacts them as working parents and use that understanding to inform policy and decision making and create effective support networks. There's no use thinking about policies and thinking about interventions if you don't really understand who your people are and what's going on for them. So I think that is fundamental. The second one for institutions was about ensuring leaders and managers are having open and honest conversations with their staff about workloads, about objectives, and about expectations, and make changes to promotion and appraisal processes to broaden success criteria that focuses on output and reconsiders deadlines. And I know, Katie, you did a really interesting piece of work about this in your former institution, didn't you? So I'm sure DMU are going to see lots of positive influences from you in this space. But I think there's that in itself is a really massive topic, because it's about trust and it's about being able to have sometimes difficult and uncomfortable conversations. The other recommendations for institutions are about career growth opportunities, making sure that all members of staff are included. And this is a really important one that will certainly ring true in the future, because as I think we can probably anticipate, more of us will be working remotely more of the time. We need to make sure that career development opportunities are equally distributed, and that if you are someone that is working more of the time remotely, you don't miss out on all of those unplanned interactions with people that ultimately contribute to your career success. There are just two recommendations for individuals, so I'll just describe them quickly. So the first one for individuals is at work to talk with your line manager, to talk with your colleagues, to talk with your sponsor or mentors, or if you haven't got one, get one, about your own circumstances, challenges and concerns. So it's being really proactive and honest about your availability and capacity and being in conversation. So that's the first key thing. And similarly, the second recommendation for individuals was about at home. It was about talking to your partner about the division of household, caring and childcare duties, and taking steps in the areas where you feel there would be most beneficial impact before it needs to happen. So having two sorts of really, really important conversations ongoing. So that was what our research found. So the moment of our research feels very different from the moments now, but I think what we found and what we're recommending absolutely is going to be really important for us as we start to navigate new ways of working.
Great, thanks very much. And I think it's something for all Vice Chancellors to bear in mind as we go forward there. Thank you. I think also we're beginning to get some questions coming in as well, aren't we? So I don't know, Jo, if you are wanting to put those to us.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's been a fascinating conversation to listen in to the two of you talking. So thank you very much for that. We've got a couple of questions, and I'll bring them in just a moment. But it's been fascinating to hear you talking about your leadership role, not in terms of supporting just your own careers, but this is something that Liliana Hubbard has mentioned around support and mentorship. And Liliana says hi, by the way, Alice. You may remember her from UCL. Liliana asks, and she says, you both talk about support and mentorship and the ambition that you have for other women to succeed. And she's wondering, is this really the definition of a good leader? So I think that's a question for both of you. I guess it's around servant leadership in a way. It's not about always responding to the hierarchical norms, but thinking, what can I do to support the women in and around me? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Shall I kick off and then I'll hand
Yes,
over?
please, Kate.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I do feel pretty passionately that as a woman, it's really our responsibility to make sure we leave women in our trail. And, I think that's why I was delighted when I left Royal Holloway. There were a lot more women professors than when I'd taken on a senior manager role, and a lot more sort of heads of schools and departments that were women as well. So, there was a kind of sense there that something had been achieved. So I think that's important. I agree with your question, Liliana, that, certainly as a leader, and Jo, your interpretation of that, which is certainly that for me, a good leader is someone who enables other people. I sort of think about it. I could sit in my office here and I'm trying to be a good leader, but if it's all down to me, I'm not going to, as one single person, get very much done. I've actually got to empower the institution to be able to act and do things. And for me, certainly that's good leadership. But I think it's also that's an interesting thing around women in leadership. I know when I was a sort of junior member of the executive, my previous institution, I sort of watched some of the men and think, I can't do that. And then I'd realize it wasn't that I couldn't do it. I couldn't do what they were doing. I would do it in my own way and it would be different. And I think, again, that point of people's viewpoint about what makes good leadership is still pretty determined by quite a kind of masculine interpretation of that, of being in charge and of being in a particular way. But Alice, I don't know what you think.
Yeah, it's interesting because I mean, role models are so important, aren't they? And until you see women, or until you see people in leadership roles that you feel you can aspire to and relate to, then it's difficult to kind of develop your own sense of what leadership is and what leadership looks like. I think if I think about answering that question, Liliana, I think about the leaders that I've worked with that inspire me. And what is it that they have in common? And there are definitely a few things. I mean, one of them is that they don't focus on the detail. They act in a way that is really empowering and really enables you to own something and get something done. And I've looked back on things in the past and been like, oh my goodness, I can't believe that such and such didn't spot that typo. What were they thinking? How embarrassing. But the thing is that they're not interested in that, because they are looking beyond that and they're looking at the bigger picture. So that's kind of one really interesting trait. They really focus on the bigger picture, and they really enable you to be part of that and to make a contribution. And I think that feeds directly into what Katie says as well, because they themselves can't do everything, even if they wanted to. So the only way that they can get things done is to find good people, trust them, empower them, and try and support them to be the best that they can be. So if you can find people like that near you, even if they're not your own line manager, it doesn't matter at all. If you can find people like that you think are connected to the bigger picture and are the kind of people that will empower others, then I would recommend that you try and get close to them and see how you can support them to do their work, and only good things will come from it. Yeah.
Thank you very much for those answers, both of you. I'm going to bring in another question in just a moment, but I suppose I wanted to follow up on that a little bit, and there's a prompt in a further comment from Liliana as well I'll bring into this comment. I loved the Sharing the Caring report, Alice. I'm actually referring to it later on in a presentation I'm doing around lunchtime as part of our events. But it got me thinking about the invisible work that happens not just in the domestic environment, but in the work sphere as well. And I think some women feel that there is invisible work that is picked up perhaps more by women in a work environment, whether that's around pastoral support and mentoring for students, other things that perhaps don't get recognised in the standard academic metrics. And your point earlier, Katie, that there are reports that men have done quite well in getting their journal articles submitted during lockdown, women maybe not so much. It's for those reasons we need to structure in support and understanding. So, for example, in the Faculty of Business and Law, we've got a statement on responsible research metrics that we remind ourselves at Faculty Research Committee. There are other things that we're trying to do, myself and my fabulous colleague Yasmin, who co-chairs DMU Women, who Alice, you know, trying to bring in other things like menopause guidance, because there will be people not necessarily in early careers, in their mid-careers, thinking, there's this thing going on now and I need the support and understanding from my workplace. And Liliana's comment is a little bit around detail and process, I suppose. And what can we do? What can we do at the university to structure in the space? Because it's all very well saying, say yes to things, explore opportunities, create your own portfolio, find things that look interesting that aren't being done, and then you can find that you create a job around you. But that's not so easy if you're full up to here with other stuff going on. So very rambling question and a follow-up, but it's really, what can we do to structure this in rather than wait for women to have serendipitous moments that they can say yes to? And we'll start, Katie, we'll start with you on that one, please.
Thanks. Well, I really think it's for us to, as an institution, to determine what's important, what it is that we want our staff to be doing. And if supporting students and being a personal tutor is important, then that's got to feed its way through into proper promotion criteria and a way through for doing that sort of route as well. So, I think it's a very good question, Joe, but I think I'll sort of say two things. One is we've really got to think about what's important for us as an institution in terms of who we are and where we're going. And hopefully, the strategy work that I've been kicking off will ask those questions and answer them. That's one thing. I think you're right then. Some people can end up with really bitty things. I remember once when I was dean, talking to a head of school and saying, well, this person comes up every year and they never seem to apply for promotions. Sort of what's going on? What does their CV look like? And what are they doing? And when they explained to me, I said, can't you actually just give them a proper kind of leadership role? They're doing about 6 or 7 things, which are all really fragmented. Why don't you actually put them into a proper role, of which they did do, and a year later that person was promoted. So I think, there's got to be those questions about, that are asked of people who are line managers about how are you actually supporting a sort of coherent development of somebody's career, because actually if people are being scattered all over the place, it's quite difficult to do that. And it can lead people to think that some people aren't very good at anything because they say, oh, well, they haven't really done anything big. And you're kind of like, yeah, but you've never given them a chance. So I think it's those two things. We've got to know where we're trying to go and what we value as being important, and build things around that. But then also we've got to make sure that the right kind of questions are being asked in terms of leadership and support of well, it's women and men, it's everybody, isn't it, really, at that point, everybody. But there's a tendency, I think, to give women quite a lot of small jobs. Thanks. Alice?
Yeah, and I could follow up from what you just said, Katie, by talking about the individual as well. So I think the flip side of that coin is each person having a good sense of who they are, what's important to them, what they want, and where they're going. And I think that we often take for granted that. We're so busy doing our roles and saying yes to things and delivering things that we often forget to take a step back and try and think about, actually, what am I working on at the moment? What proportion of my time am I spending on what kinds of activities, and how is that contributing to where I'm going? And where am I going? What do I want? What will success look like to me in 5 years' time? And what do I need to therefore be doing now to support that? Because you can't really have a very effective conversation with your line manager and get their support for achieving that if you don't know what that is. So I think absolutely having line managers being able to support provoking that conversation is really essential. But as individuals, we have to take the time and make the time to stop and think about where we are and where are we going. That's essential too.
That's great. Thank you very much. Just in the last 5 minutes of our session, I can see that there are 3 questions that have come through, and I'm going to ask all 3 of them. And between the 2 of you, hopefully we'll be able to answer them. So the first question I can see that came through a couple of moments ago is from Meredith Wilkinson, who says, what advice would you give to women who may have circumstances in their lives, such as a disability within their career? So that's a question around disability and special circumstances. I have another question that came through from Monica Barrett that says, are there initiatives and interventions that you're considering that we can implement at DMU to help advance the careers of professional services women in particular? So this may link back to your earlier comment, Katie, that we need to have that conversation and ascertain that, but there may be a couple of ideas you wanted to talk about. And then the third question, it's around a comment really, and I can't see who asked it, but the person says, I recently read an article that women are over-mentored and under-sponsored. Do you have any advice on cultivating sponsors who will spend their social capital to connect women with their opportunities? So we've got disability, professional support, and then sponsor versus mentor. I don't know if you wanted to start us off, Katie, and then between the 2 of you, we'll see if we can answer those 3 questions. Thank you.
Sure, give it a go. Thank you. So the one about disability first. I think we should be clear that everybody has different needs, and I'm aware that quite a lot of the conversation that we've been having has talked about women with partners, and we perhaps haven't talked about women as single people as well much. So, you know, there's just a lot of things in there that you know, there's a lot of intersectionality between women and the different things that they go through. I think, in a sense, what I'll try and say pertains to all of that, which is it's really important to think about what it is that you need, particularly if it's, you know, particularly if it's covered by an issue to do with the Equal Rights Act. Then, of course, you know, your employers have therefore got to address, you know, within reasonable measures, the needs that you have. But I think, you know, again, it's just a good time to reflect, and coming out of COVID, isn't it, the way in which this world has perhaps helped some people. So certainly some of the conversations I've had with people who are disabled have said they've really appreciated being able to do things online more. It depends the nature of the disability as well. In terms of professional services, yeah, I think it's one of the things we need to look at further. I mean, Jo, as you said, it's probably part of the sort of conversation for the future rather than a fixed plan I have, but certainly I've seen previously work that's been done on mapping pathways and careers for professional services, and I'm sure we can do more about that. That question about mentors and sponsors is very interesting as well, and I think there's a you know, I was very appreciative, although I've had informal mentors quite a bit, but the ones who actually put my name forward to sit on external committees because they were in the place to do that, they were the bits that really helped. So I think that sponsorship, how you can actually practically move someone on by in a sense, enabling them to be in that, is something that's really worth thinking about.
And I'll just add to that. So in a timely comment. So as we probably will be working more and more remotely in the future, we shouldn't underestimate the value of meeting new people and networking, because it's through those interactions that we will meet potential sponsors and informal and formal mentors. And those people have such an influence, a positive influence over the opportunities available to us. So just a plea, I suppose, from me to whatever happens over the next months and years, don't forget the importance of putting yourself in opportunities where you can interact with new and different people. And if you find yourselves in those spaces, don't just be there, go and speak to people, go and meet different people, follow up with people afterwards, because it's those interactions and those moments that will all contribute to your fulfillment and development in your career.
I think that's excellent advice to finish us up on, Alice. Thank you. And I would totally recommend anyone looking at the WEN website. There are different ways to join, and for those who want to join as an individual, there's no fee, is there, Alice? So there's nothing to prohibit women from joining WEN. Get that external networking going, and let's get this conversation continuing on throughout the day and for the rest of our time as women in higher education. So thank you both very much indeed, Professor Katie Normington, our new Vice-Chancellor, and Alice Silver, CEO of WEN. It's been lovely to talk to you. Happy International Women's Day to you and to everybody who has participated in this session. Thanks very much all. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Bye-bye.